Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you to the organizers of this. So today I'm going to present what is going to be my job market paper, that is the welfare effects of residential battery policies. Just a brief disclaimer, I like to start with the bad news. We are not going to see the welfare numbers today. The PhD has told me that getting data is a nightmare. And so I am in the process of finalizing to get this final step of the data. And so I have some preliminary numbers, but I hope that they are going to get way better when I get this data during the summer. So think of this as a two-season type of presentation. You see the first part today, and then November 15th, you can go to the website I don't have to see a result. Okay, so let's start to try to convince you that anyway it's worth listening to me for half an hour. And so my paper starts with a very well-known fact that is that governments around the world are pushing for the carbonization of the grid, right? And one way that they have been doing that was by promoting rooftop solar as a key part of that transition. In the setting that I'm looking, that is California, there is 15 gigawatts of installed capacity that is coming from these rooftop solars. However, the technology is costly for the system, mainly because solar panels produce a lot of energy during midday. And so here in this graph, we have the 24 hours of the day, and this purple line is the demand of energy that we are asking to thermal generators. And we see that during midday, that demand decreases a lot when solar panels are producing. However, when the sun sunsets, and so we arrive to the night, there is a big peak of production that implies that we need to turn on very expensive generators that are very pollutant. And moreover, we have this ramp that we wouldn't have without solar panels, and ramps in energy markets are very costly because, again, we need to pay generators to start. So policymakers are very concerned about this, and they are first in many places. So rooftop solar panels are no longer subsidized, and moreover, people are still installing solar panels, and so they are trying to think about policies that might potentially push people to install solar panels paired with a residential battery. And so the first question that we can make is, well, where is the room for this policy? Why these policymakers think that they might need to subsidize this market? And so obviously in a first type of market where the private value of installing a battery is the same as the social value, we wouldn't need these subsidies in the first place. But we are very far away from this market, mainly for three things that I'm going to mention and that I'm going to put into my model. The first one is that the price that we face as consumers is very different than the social cost of producing energy, right? We know that energy is very expensive at night, but as consumers, we pay, except if you're in Spain or in very few places, you pay at most two types of prices, one for the day, one for the night, that do not reflect properly the cost of producing that energy at night. And so when people are installing batteries, they are thinking how much they are saving on their bill without considering how much actually costs to produce that energy. Then we have also a concern regarding the distributional effects of these type of policies, because the grid costs that we need to recover. So even if we have solar panels, if we have batteries, the grid is still expensive to maintain, very expensive to maintain. And as adopters buy less and less from the grid, non-adopters are paying more and more to maintain that grid. And as long as adopters in general tend to be high-income households, governments might also be worried about the distributional effect of these policies. And then the third one that is very well known in the environmental literature is that emissions are not fully priced. So when households are deciding to install a battery, they do not internalize the effect that it can have on fossil generation. So we understand that there is room for public intervention, but we actually don't know what is the welfare effect of that intervention. And actually policymakers are very puzzled, and they are they are spending billions of dollars in this technology. That is an expensive technology, and it's not clear. Some governments are putting these policies, some governments are removing these policies. So there is no clear consensus on the overall effects of them. So that's where I hope that my paper is going to help. And so the question that I want to answer is how these residential battery policies affect the welfare and who gains. So for that, I'm going to do three things. The first one, I'm going to provide some descriptive evidence, reduced for evidence on adoption of batteries. So I'm going to look if electricity prices affect if people install batteries. I'm going to look if outages affect how people install batteries. And I'm going to look if changing how much money the government gives you for exporting your solar production of solar at midday also generates incentives to install batteries. Then, with those results in hand, I'm going to build my structural model that tries to link these household adoption decisions to the entire power system. So essentially, in my model, I'm going to consider that a household decides whether to adopt or not. Then they are going to decide how to consume electricity, how to operate their technology. That is going to have an effect on the demand that thermal generators face. And then I'm going to model how generators are committed. And with that, the goal is to build some policy counterfactuals and welfare decompositions in which I can understand each of these policies, how they affect people that adopt, that are going to benefit from having bill savings and having backup power that in batteries is very important, especially in places like California, where there is a ton of outages. And then non-adopters are going to benefit on one hand from less, lower prices of electricity, but higher prices to maintain the grid. And then on the supply side, we are going to see that some producers might potentially exit. And so I want to estimate how producer surplus is going to change and the emissions. Yes.
Is one policy I know that matters is like the net metering. Do they pay the retail price or the wholesale price? Is that going to be somewhere in the policy counterfactuals?
First is in the reduced form, and yeah, for sure it's going to be one of the counterfactuals. Yeah. For sure, I want to measure at least how the welfare changed when that policy was implemented. Yes. And so the goal of this is to turn these private adoption responses into system welfare effects. Yes.
I know you said that you don't have the results yet, but at least conceptually, what is going to be welfare for you? It is the bills at the household level, losses in the system.
No.
I see many outcomes that could matter, right? What do you have in mind?
Well, so I have in my adoption model, I have the utility that households get from consuming electricity and for deciding into adoption of one of these technologies. So welfare is going to be essentially how this utility, the deterministic part, is going to change depending on the policy and depending on the decision that they made. That's for the part of the consumer. Then I'm going to have also the emission part of, the emission part on the evaluated at the social cost of carbon.
And another question, sorry, following up on this, then for utilities, the bill, right? How much you pay for the electricity, right? That's what you mean with utility.
No, can I pause this question until I show my model?
Okay.
And then I'm trying,
yes,
okay. So, yes.
Do we see in this case, when we have residential subsidy and then firms make more revenue, they have more money, they can overcome innovation costs, they do more innovation, then battery cost also goes down?
I agree with this. I'm not modeling at all the battery side of things. In my model right now, there is expectations that battery prices are going to go down, and that affects how people are going to install batteries. What I'm planning to do is to allow many different scenarios of different battery prices, but I do not have a part of the model in which there is production of batteries. But it's a good point. We are good? Okay. So, believe me, I contribute to the literature. So, let me tell you 2 seconds about the institutional framework a little bit. Just very briefly, I know that most of you know this, but let me tell you how electricity prices are decided. On the in the wholesale side. So I'm going to focus on the day ahead market. So the market that decide prices at the hour level the day before the demand is realized. And the way that happens is that generators are the stock. A generator makes a bid on how much they can produce at what price. And so they are ordered from less expensive to more expensive. Then we look where the demand is at that hour, and that determines the price that is going to be paid. And then all inframarginal generators are going to receive the same. And then the other important thing that I want to mention of the institutional framework is that in the retail side, how our bills are formed, we have a part that is for these generation prices. So this thing that in California is around 30%, and then 70% that is a non-generation charges, so related to maintaining the grid, to paying these policies, etc. And yes, these non-generation charges recover fixed revenue requirements. So, okay, let me now start with these three results of what motivates adoption. And so the first thing that I wanted to see was this change in the NEM policy. So I wanted to see if changing how much you are paying people to export to the grid is actually affecting their decisions. So what happened was that until April 2023, if you were exporting at midday, they were paying you almost exactly what you were paying for electricity. So they were paying you a lot. And so it was very profitable to have solar panels and then just make them export energy. After 2023, they decreased the amount by 70% with the hope that people were going to install batteries together with solar panels. And indeed, that was happening. This is a policy moment. This is the proportion of solar installations that were paired with a battery. And what we can see is that before they were around maybe 10%. And after the policy, there was a gigantic increase at around 50% by 2024, okay? This decrease just is that data takes time to update. So that's why I put a line, like starting here is no longer credible, but from industry reports, this keep happen in 2025, and hopefully they're going to upload the data soon. Okay, we're fine? Okay, the second thing I wanted to see was if prices had an effect on installing batteries. This is something that people have said in surveys, that they care about energy prices. And so one idea is that these higher retail prices make cell consumption more valuable. And how I'm going to identify if this is true, I'm going to exploit a border discontinuity between utilities in California. So California is divided between three utilities. You cannot choose three main utilities. You cannot choose which one you are assigned to, and the limits of these utilities are more or less random. They do not follow counties, etc. And so one side of this line, you get a lower price, and the other side gets a high price. And so I have some cross-sectional variation just on which side you are, and then also some intertemporal variation, because prices change very differently across time depending on the utility. So just let me tell you extremely briefly that I'm doing an IV RD specification in which I'm trying to recover how much battery installation change depending on which side of the border you are. And what I see is that a 10% increase in retail prices generates a 0.25 increase in installations per 1,000 customers, which I know that seems very few, but installation of batteries is still a new technology. There is like 250K batteries in California right now. So that's more or less an increase of 20% per quarter. Yes?
Going to both look at sort of value of reliability and prices in the same specification, or like there's just, because like then it's harder to compare the magnitude, right? Like how much do I value reliability relative to prices? Like how much do I value the feed-in tariff relative to retail price?
You're meaning reliability in the sense of outages?
Yeah.
No. This specification only considers that you are on the side that is more expensive to buy electricity versus the other one. It's only looking at that and is not considering at all outages. This specification.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking like, because you said you're also going to look at reliability, it would be easier to compare the magnitudes if you're controlling for reliability changes as well.
I see. I haven't done that, but I have border segments, fixed effects. So I think it should be into that. Okay, thank you. Okay, and then the last thing I'm going to say very briefly is that I'm considering also the effect that outages have. I'm doing a dynamic lag event study, and I see that if you double outage exposure, then installations rise by 25 to 35%. So only considering this reliability. So right now we have in hand that people care about prices, people care about outages, and people care about how much you're paying for exporting the energy. So now what I want to do with my model is to understand how adoption, hourly electricity, and wholesale equilibrium interact, so that then I can make these welfare counterfactuals. So my model, this is just a very brief scheme of what I'm doing. In my first part, I have adoption, which is slow moving and is absorbing. So every quarter, you need to make a decision of whether to adopt or not the technology, depending on the price that you pay, the bills saving that you can have, and the outage value that you can have. Then the household decide every hour how to operate the technology. So they decide how much to consume, depending on their preference, depending on the solar panels and the batteries that they installed before. And then that generates an aggregate demand that is going to go to the wholesale market, that every hour is going to have a social planner that is going to decide which generators are going to produce, depending on the demand, the startup cost, and yeah.
What's happening with the storage in the solar parks and not the rooftop?
Sorry?
I mean, there's a bunch of solar generation in solar parks in California.
Mm-hmm.
And they're increasingly putting in storage into that generation.
Yes.
So how do you think about that? Because that would be alternative way of doing this, do it at the solar park level, not at the house level.
Yeah, that's a very good question. And indeed, regulators are aware that they are doing this in two ways, and they are unsure if this is the efficient way or not. Also because both of these are answering to different inefficiencies. Like people are making this decision for different reasons, like utility scale generators versus residential. So what I'm going to do in this part of the model is that what I'm going to do is to consider that solar generation is exogenous. And then in the supply side, I'm going to consider also that the social planner needs to dispatch utility scale batteries as well. So what I'm going to eventually try, one of the conclusions I hope to have is something like, if I put $1 more into my residential battery subsidy, this is generating this loss in the utility scale battery. And then there is one paper that looks at the effect of utility scale batteries on wholesale market. So hopefully I'm able to compare a little bit the two. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Any other question? Okay. So let me go. How much time do I have?
10 minutes.
Okay. Kind of I'm trying to put not many equations here, so this is mostly about intuition. So each quarter, what is happening in my adoption part is that household I chooses whether to adopt the technology or not, and adoption is absorbing, meaning that once you adopt the technology, you cannot do anything else. And then adoption decisions are between solar panel and batteries. And if you decide to adopt a technology, J in time T, market M, you're going to get some value from some observable characteristics. You need to pay the price of the technology when you dislike. This is including subsidies from the government. Then you have some operating value of that, meaning how much you're going to save from electricity bills, okay? And then we have market times and shocks fixed effects. How I'm going to model this operating value? Well, that is coming from a second stage consumption and battery operation model, in which I'm going to consider how people are expecting to consume and to save in the next 20 years, so the lifespan of the battery, and put that expectation here. Then if you decide not to adopt, then what is going to happen is that you wait and you keep the option to adopt later. And so you are not going to have the price of the technology, and you're going to have the option value of waiting, okay? So you are going to say, I'm not going to adopt today because I think that probably tomorrow is more valuable to adopt. And that decision is going to depend on the state variables, that is how you expect that technology costs are going to evolve, how you expect that retail prices are going to evolve, export rules, rebates, and outage exposure. Make sense? So,
Sorry,
yes.
Where's the outage exposure?
Yes, sorry. Is inside here, there is a function of, I should write this more explicitly because it's an important part, is there is a function of how much outages you have had, your county has had in the past 6 months.
And you're assuming it's uncorrelated across counties.
I'm assuming that is uncorrelated. No, I mean,
Sorry, just
no, it's fine. But it doesn't matter because I have a market fixed effect, so it shouldn't matter.
Okay.
Fine. Okay, so no, and moreover, like the important thing is that it's something that I didn't think it's something that does not like it's not correlated with the exactly, yes, because like it's something that is coming from like the technology of the generator. Okay, so on my supply side, I'm just trying to give just the intuition here of what I'm doing. So I'm modeling the wholesale market as a dynamic centralized dispatch problem. What does it mean? It means that there is a social planner that is deciding how much each plant is going to produce every hour. And why is dynamic? Because we have startup costs that are very important that we need to consider. So we need to know how many plants were producing the hour before. So just to give you an idea, I'm starting with what happens if we do a static model. And so we have generators stacked by marginal cost, in which first we have renewables, then we have combined cycle gas that are plants that have lower marginal cost, and then we have peaker plants. So plants that in general are turned on during peak periods. And so if we are during the day, we see that the marginal generator is number 2. Instead, in the night, the marginal generators becomes number 4. And if we install batteries, hopefully we see that there is like a reduction in the residual demand that this generator face. And now the marginal generator is number 3, which is less pollution. However, the story is not so simple, because what was happening is that when we have tons of solar, there were many generators that were turned off during the first hours of the day, as I was showing in the graph before. And so what is happening is that you need to pay them to start operating at 7 p.m., 5 p.m. when the peak starts. And so you need to add to this marginal cost also the startup cost. So just the cost that you need to burn a ton of fuel and the startup cost that you have for operating. And one of the big things is that plants that have lower marginal costs, so they are more efficient in operating over time, and also the ones that have higher startup costs. So this plant, although it has very little marginal cost, it has big startup costs. And so that's the reason why these are the peakers, because are the ones that are very easy to turn on because they are not so expensive, even though maintaining them, it is kind of expensive. So that changed a little bit the order of the production. And instead of number 3, we have the peakers 4 and 5. Before, this is the demand that was during the night without batteries. And this is the demand that we have thanks to batteries. And we see that there is a reduction in price, that it might be very different to the one that we can imply if we do not consider that these decision productions are dynamic. Moreover, an important thing is that these 2 plants are also the more pollutant ones, because these peaker plants are the ones that have the higher emissions. So it's important to consider also for the change in emissions, the fact that the startup costs are going to promote that these peaker plants go first. Make sense? Okay. So what I'm going to do is just that the generator is going to, the social planner. This is a perfectly competitive market in which the social planner face a residual demand, based on the demand, based on how much batteries produced, and based on exogenous production like solar, etc. And then it's going to decide which plant to dispatch every hour based on the marginal cost versus based on the minimum load cost, so how much a plant needs to be on once you started, and based on the startup cost, subject to a bunch of operational constraints. So how am I estimating this model? The first part that I need are the parameters of the adoption part, in which we have technology cost and operating value elasticities. And so I'm doing an Excel fixed point with finite horizon because it's a non-stationary problem. And where identification is coming from, so we have on one hand this elasticity for the technology of prices, which is of course endogenous. And so I'm instrumenting it with things like its other cost, so the wage of paying workers, lithium prices, rebate prices in other states. And then we have variation in the expected operating value, so how much you expect to save from the bill. That is the variation from that. I'm estimating in a separate stage, and the variation for that is coming for changes in retail prices and in export compensation. So when they change how much they are paying you for exporting, that is going to generate changes in this expected operating value. Okay, I'm very out of time. So I have, I think, 2 minutes. Okay, so just to say that in the supply side, the majority of things, I'm less concerned about endogeneity because I need to give the social planner each of the elements that it needs for the optimization, but the marginal cost, the minimum load cost, the constraints all come from technological and production function things that are well known in the engineer and the hierarchy literature, so I'm estimating them outside of the model. And then the only thing that I need to estimate inside the model are startup costs, that I'm doing it with a GMM. And so once I have all of these primitives, I can build the optimizer of the social planner, which is going to allow me to estimate these contrafactuals, the price, the cost, and the emissions. There is an equilibrium. And then just, again, this is extremely preliminary because this is only using aggregate consumption data. So just to tell you that intuitively, each of these parts seem to work. So in the consumption and savings part, it seems that there is the savings from having solar panel and the savings from having batteries change after the export policy change. The price coefficient of adoption of the technology has an elasticity of 0.3, and then the wholesale production, I'm finding that if we increase production of residential batteries by 1 more gigawatt, there is approximately 98 millions of savings in production and 125 millions in emissions. All of this is extremely preliminary, so yes, okay. And so just to conclude, this is the welfare part. So essentially, yes, I think I don't have time, but just to say that we are, I'm considering how the indirect utility is changing in different policies for each consumer, depending on the decision that they make. And then total welfare includes also emissions. And what I want to do with this is just to conclude is to vary different policies and see how all these 3 stages change. When we change export credit levels, when we change rebate, when we change how the rate bill is designed. For instance, now in California, they are imposing fixed costs to the bill instead of everything recovered through volumetric costs. And eventually, I want to include the virtual power plants. California has the bigger virtual power plants. So yeah, thank you very much.